John Judge. You favor opening the archives. I wonder whether you have any preliminary hypotheses about what would be found there if the archives were opened.
I think more important than what specifically remains in the archives, Norman Mailer compared it to a Mercedes-Benz that's been left, I think he set up in Harlem for 20 years in terms of what we might find. But we do have lists of what was put in, so we can at least compare them to what comes out. But I think what's more important is the principle that this is public information and it belongs to us, the people of the United States, and not to any secret government or intelligence network or any president or any Congress who are merely hired by us to do our bidding anyway. You know, Thomas Jefferson said that given a choice between a government with no newspaper and a newspaper with no government, he'd always choose the latter. Of course, he never had a chance to read the Washington Post or the New York Times, but the principle he was getting at is that democracy doesn't work unless the people are educated. And he said that the final repository, the ultimate repository of all knowledge must rest in the people, and that there's no one else who's good enough or smart enough to invest that control in a truly democratic society. And we call for a full opening of the files, not dribbled out through pre-censorship like Freedom of Information Act documents with pieces missing, not to selected historians or medical experts, not to a special prosecutor or yet another congressional investigation, but to the people themselves. And much of this that we know about the Kennedy case and the evidence of conspiracy comes from the hard work of independent individual investigators whose names are not mentioned in large part in the film. Mae Brussel, Penn Jones, Sylvia Marr, Holcomb Heston, Paris Lamond, and that's only a few. The current researchers, Robert Groden and Philip Melanson, are still continuing to follow the evidence. When that material comes out, they will be extra little pieces in the jigsaw puzzle, in the mosaic. But we've had enough out in these many years to solve the case. There's enough of the picture visible in the record and in the historical view that we've had in order to get at the bottom of it. So I don't see the files ultimately as holding so much of a smoking gun as merely telling us one more time what the government did or didn't find out about the case. I would like to support the film. I think that outside of the films done by Civil War buffs who try to get every uniform and every rifle right, that Oliver Stone has done the most historically accurate work on the Kennedy assassination to date. The reason it struck a nerve is that this is the hidden secret in the American psyche since that day, November 22nd, 63. The American public has known, and in fact I would contend has been told over and over, that there was a conspiracy to kill the President of the United States, that the people who did it got away with it, and that we can't touch them. And I think that that's in large part why so few people vote nowadays. But Stone has gone into that darkness and shone a light and looked at things. And I think the conclusion of his film is right. I think from my own work, I read the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission. You know, Alan Dulles, when he was asked about releasing the evidence by Hale Boggs, said, go ahead and print it, nobody will read it anyway. And unfortunately, especially now in a post-literate generation, Stone's film is about the only thing that will reach youth. There are a few of us who read still, but as you well know, the FBI is trying to get our name from the library. So this has crossed over the line, and it's why it's so disturbing. But let me tell you two stories to end that convinced me that this was not only a conspiracy, but a conspiracy well beyond the capability of any mafia goon, of any CIA schlepper, of any renegade element in the U.S. intelligence, of any oilman with a beef. These are the layers of the onion that were planted at the beginning so we'd never see the core. My mother worked for 30 years altogether, but 25 years for the Deputy Chief of Staff in the Personnel Office of the U.S. Army, directly under the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She was the highest paid woman employee of the Pentagon. She was 5 levels above top security. I mentioned to Fletcher Prouty the other day, I work from the bottom up and he works from the top down, and we met at the Joint Chiefs. My mother's job was to project overall national draft call figures 5 years in advance. She had to project an annual national selective service call that was right within 100 people either way, 5 years ahead. She knew from those projections and from the information she got that they were withdrawing from Vietnam. And if you want to get hold of the papers that prove Prouty's point, I just got this today at the Government Printing Office, Foreign Relations of the United States, 61 to 63. The State Department papers are released in Volume 4 of the Vietnam series. This is August to December 1963, and the security memoranda are in there to talk about Kennedy's plan. It's been backed up by Arthur Schlesinger, and more recently, yesterday, I believe, or the day before in the New York Times, by Roger Hilsman. He was pulling out. My mother knew that because she had to project those kind of figures. I asked her after she retired, when did they tell you they would escalate in Vietnam? Because she had to be among the first to know. She said late November of 63. I said the last week in November. She said yes, the Monday following the assassination. I said, was this a few more advisors, a change in policy? She said, I couldn't believe the figures. I took them back to the Joint Chiefs in what must have been the first protest by the civilian community to the war in Vietnam and said, these can't be right. And they said, you'll use them. They told her November 25, 1963, that the war in Vietnam would last for 10 years and that 57,000 Americans would die, and to figure that in. I also talked to SAC bomber pilots, Strategic Air Command bomber pilots, who have the responsibility of nuclear and emergency response, who are in the air on regular shifts 24 hours a day. These were in the air over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base when they heard the news that Kennedy had been shot. They ran to open lockers that contain a cryptographed code book that allows them to tell whether the president is calling them and to take orders that go all the way out to fail-safe and nuclear war. There was not a pilot in the air that hour, over Wright-Pat anyway, and I would contend this is the case everywhere else, no reason to isolate it, that had a code book in that locker. We know from Pierre Salinger's book that there was no code book aboard Air Force Two, bringing the entire cabinet back from important meetings that changed the course in Vietnam in the next few days. They were in the air and had no way to communicate with the White House or the president. There's nobody that can touch those books besides the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the highest levels of defense intelligence. And at every level of my work, the Office of Navy Intelligence is who rears its head on the mechanic level, the Defense Industrial Security Command. This is the background of Oswald and Guy Bannister and Jack Ruby when we go into them. And whatever is in the record will merely back that up. The physical evidence is already in front of us, so we know that one lone nut with an old gun that lost the war for the Italians in World War II, which couldn't even shoot a bullet to line up with its own scope, didn't do the damage in Dallas. But Kennedy wasn't all that was killed that day. Democracy died. The point she was making was...
I didn't hear the last remark. Anyway.
The point she was making was that it came public that Gerald Ford was reporting directly to the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover about the internal workings of the committee, and Hoover had reason to concern himself. I think that Dan Moldea mentioned the deaths of Roselli and some of the mobsters, which I felt didn't fit the classic pattern of mob deaths anyway, but in fact, CIA heads, especially Giancana, racket investigations, and they attempted to call Giancana, and he refused and was taken in, actually into custody for refusing. And then they attempted to take his second in command, Jacob Rubenstein, in Chicago. And I found a letter in the records from the White House from Richard Nixon saying, "Don't subpoena this individual." And there was evidence that Ruby himself had in that earlier period worked with the FBI, and much of Ruby's connections to both the FBI and military intelligence have been drawn out by some of the researchers. But a more important death, I think, was that of William Sullivan, a person who headed up Division 5 of the FBI, the Domestic Operation Division, who came in with Cartha Dick DeLoach in the 40s from the Office of Naval Intelligence, promising Hoover that they'd protect his turf from the CIA. And eventually, I believe, compromised the workings of the FBI to a large degree. And this Navy intelligence thread is the one that I find most significant in the background of Oswald, who was a Navy intelligence operative, and Guy Bannister, the person who's depicted in New Orleans in the film. Oswald didn't have mafia jobs; he had intelligence jobs, from Atsugi to the job he had in New Orleans at the William Riley Coffee Canning Company. The president of that company was the main financial angel for E. Howard Hunt's Cuban Democratic Revolutionary Front down there in New Orleans, and he had a job as an oiler, and they said he could go out.
Excuse me, John, you're saying that Oswald was created essentially to do this job? I mean, he defected to the Soviet Union in 1959. John Kennedy wasn't even president then.
That's right. No, he doesn't have to be created to do the job, Dan. What I'm saying is he's got a history. Even the defection itself is clearly phony and set up by Navy intelligence. He gets his discharge because a box dropped on his mother's nose 9 months before, and the letter documenting it arrives 4 days after he gets the hardship. You try it in the Marines. And, you know, he was positioned. He moved on orders, but these were intelligence orders. And at Jagger Chow's Stovall, he had to have Navy security clearance to work in that shop because they looked at all the photographs that the Navy did from their satellites. And in fact, it was from that shop when he was working there that the pictures in '61 went to John Kennedy with the missiles in Cuba that led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so there's much more of a background of ties to intelligence. It's not that the mob couldn't have been involved, but the mob, in terms of the real power in this country, as far as I'm concerned, are nothing but shoeshine boys, errand boys for the people that really control and pull the strings. And they don't need the mob. They don't need somebody who can blackmail them later. And the mob aren't the only ones that know how to shoot a gun.
Pat Dell, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience.
You know, it's really fascinating to hear all these things.
I think the point is that people who bring up the documentary, if you want something ridiculous, try and take the Warren Commission report and relate it to the volumes of evidence. I did. Nothing backs it up. I even found they brought somebody in from the Pentagon to write the Warren Commission report that wasn't even on the investigative staff. And when I went into the minutes, the staff critiques the report line by line. Hale Boggs and Richard Russell and John Sherman Cooper all wanted to have an alternate report, and Warren wouldn't allow it. And, you know, you can't take that evidence and put Oswald in the 6th floor window. You can't prove that he owned a gun or fired a gun that day. You can't make that gun do what was said. Buy one gun in any way, and so you're left with using the evidence that they present and better evidence that's come out since. The fact that 2 guns were firing. Either you think that there were 2 lone nuts who happened to show up in Dealey Plaza on the same day at the same time with Kennedy in mind, or you have a conspiracy. Now, what that conspiracy is a deeper question, and it takes more work. You don't have to believe any of us on what we say. You shouldn't. Go do your homework. I think that history shows us over a long time that there are concentrations of wealth and power, first by theft, and then later when we have the machinery to create wealth by other design, and concentration of control over resources and over the politics of situations. If it's worth $10 million to put the CIA to throw over a government in a country like Chile, then what do you think the elections are worth here in the United States, where things reside at the level that the world can be controlled? And so I think that there isn't one. I don't think you have to think of conspiracy as a certain group of individuals, a team of 5 that sit in a boardroom and call the shots. More likely, as in all human affairs, there are many cabals, and they compete with one another, and they jockey for positions of power, and they kill one another. And I think that Kennedy got in the way of one that was particularly powerful at a particular time. He had his own. But these concentrations of wealth and power operate at a level beyond what's up there. And with apologies to Senator Gonzalez, I think that Bill Moyer's idea is exactly reversed in the secret government. He says that the government, Congress, make a mistake by going out and hiring these mafia goons and gun runners and drug carriers, and they shouldn't sully themselves with that, and they should stick to more honorable men. I think that those gun runners and opium dealers are the real government of the United States, and they're clandestine intelligence operatives, and that they in turn pay many people in 3-piece suits to stand up in front of us and tell us it's the other way around.
Next question. Anyone here have a confirmation that George Bush worked for the CIA before he was director of the CIA?
I never heard that charged, and wasn't a
Village Voice.
junk.
It's based essentially on three pieces of evidence so far that I've seen, 2 of them being internal intelligence documents. One was an FBI memo that concerned a debriefing by an FBI agent of a Navy intelligence person and a George Herbert Walker Bush at the particular address where he lived in Texas. And this debriefing was the day after the Kennedy assassination and seemed to concern the anti-Castro Cuban community in Miami and what their reactions would be. There was another document that talked about a George Bush of the CIA and his relationship to turning in another person, I believe it was, a guy named Parrott, who was with Young Americans for Freedom and the Young Republicans at the time. But there's some intelligence documents. And then the third area is the relation between the Bay of Pigs operation, potentially, and Bush, in that the code name of the Bay of Pigs was Operation Zapata, which is the name of Bush's oil company, and two of the ships used in the raid were the Houston, where he lived, and the Barbara, who he married. And I think we have other indications. The key is try to get Felix Rodriguez to tell you when he met George Bush, and you'll get the answer.
Next question.
I think there were several plans against Kennedy. In Miami, another one at the time of the Army-Navy game in October that was pulled back at the last minute when he had a cold. There were several points. Miltier, working with the far right wing, I think was privy to some of the details, but and there were different points. I think when you do this, you do it with several backup operations. I think that there's evidence that there were guns further down Stemmons Freeway if the Elm Street location had not been a go. But as Mr. X says in the movie, you leave nothing to chance.
And Mr. Judge, the bubble top?
The decision to remove the bubble top from the car, as well as to change the route of the motorcade, happened at a private oil club. We don't know which one, but we have reason to believe it was Connolly's club, one that he attended. There were present an FBI agent unnamed in the record, a Secret Service agent by the name of Harold Wong, and two people from the Advanced Public Relations firm, Saul Bloom Agency, where Oswald did some of his photographic work, where he worked at Jagger Charles Stovall, because they had better blow-up and reduction equipment over at the ad agency than the contractor did. Their names were Jack Puterbaugh and Elizabeth Forsling. She later married Leon Harris, the guy that ran the department stores there in Dallas and big money. She was referred to in those years as a Dallas contact by the Washington intelligence community. She later co-founded Ms. Magazine with another CIA agent by the name of Gloria Steinem. This is not an attack on feminism on my part. I believe in radical feminism, but people have histories and should be looked at. And she was the one that specifically brought up leaving the bubble top off the car. There was a conversation between, that Prouty mentioned on the radio, between LBJ and Hoover, where Hoover said the bubble top wouldn't have made any difference. But I think anything that would have deflected a shot would have had a significance to a gunman.
Our next speaker needs no introductions except for please welcome Dr. Cyril Wecht.
Thank you very much. We have a deadline, and whatever it is now that's been left to me, I certainly will abide by it. I'm pleased to have given the time to some of my colleagues. As a matter of fact, I remember a debate once with William Buckley on television, and it came time for him to have rebuttal. And he sat back, folded his hands across his abdomen, and said, you know, I think I'll just take the time to sit here and reflect upon what I said earlier. I'd like to take, I'd just like to sit back for the next 15 minutes, whatever I have left, and reflect upon what Wallace and David and Gary and David Mantic and Roger Feynman have presented. It's been outstanding. Let me try in the minutes that I have left to me to cover some points, and if I get some of the slides, fine. There's so much. Dr. Lundberg said he's looking for a quest for a consensus. I want to point out to you that every national poll that has ever been taken, going back more than 25 years in the United States of America, and those that have been taken abroad, we've had a consensus. He also talks about, makes a big thing about fees and honoraria, and saw to it that in the GM article, which was published, they've rejected. They told me to take it down to 500 words. There have been other letters to the editor, Dr. Lundberg, that have been in excess of 500 words. I was told if I had one word over 500, it would not be published. At the end of my article was put down that I had received a stipend for my work as a technical advisor in JFK. I get $3,500 for going away for one day and staying overnight. I'll tell you this, I got one hell of a lot less than that for the work that I did on the movie. What has money got to do with it? I hope that Dr. Latimer has made and will make $1 million on his books. I hope that Dr. West makes a lot of money on his video. They're entitled to it. What's the problem? What's the problem? So the fact, though, that it's put in for me that I made a stipend. He said Dr. Humes was not a fully trained forensic pathologist. Come on, Dr. Lundberg. He wasn't a trained forensic pathologist from day one. He never spent one single day in a forensic pathology training program. Dr. Lundberg, a pathologist, knows that. Dr. Lundberg was an academic pathologist before he became editor of JAMA. Look at the HSCA testimony when Humes had to look into the eyes of the forensic pathologists and knew that he could not bullshit them, and see what he said. He had not done medical legal autopsies. Let's not obfuscate that issue. Russell Fisher, trust him with your life. Well, I trained in Baltimore. I won't get into that, whether I trust him with my life. But let's look at something that is tangible. Fisher and others go in, the Ramsey-Clark panel, which we came to learn about years later, they knew 4-5 years before I disclosed it to Fred Graham of the New York Times in August of '72 that the brain was missing, the microscopic autopsy tissue slides, the paraffin blocks, codechromes of the internal chest wounds were missing. These men who testified in court in murder cases all the time never said a word about the missing evidence. You talk about integrity? You want me to tell you what Russell Fisher would have said to Attorney Brown, who came to him and said, hey, I want you to testify in a murder case that has to do with gunshot wounds to the head? We don't have the brain, Doc. And that's not around. We don't have the tissue slides. Russell would have said, goodbye, goodbye. Yeah, he had integrity. In this case, somehow, it seemed to have left him. Dr. Lundberg made references to various pathologists about how they all agree, and Dr. Petty, the top forensic pathologist in the world, well, I won't get into a urinating contest, especially in the presence of a specialist in urology, Dr. Latimer, as to who is the top forensic pathologist in the world. There are a couple or a few dozen forensic pathologists in America who would disagree with that. And insofar as what do pathologists around the world say, I'm not conducting a survey, but let me tell you, man, I have lectured on this subject by invitation in Australia, South Africa, London, China, Israel, and a dozen other countries, and dozens others not by invitation, but as part of a program. I know what they feel. They feel that the Warren Commission report is the biggest bunch of nonsense that's ever been perpetrated in the field of forensic science. That's what they feel all around the world. Dr. Lundberg said they did an interview, they did interviews with all the pathologists and all the doctors at Parkland, he mentioned, and they were published, I think his exact words, in 21 pages of journalism. Tell me, Dr. Lundberg, when your man Dennis Brio went to Dallas, did he interview Dr. Charles Crenshaw? What kind of journalism was that? When you stated in your publication that Dr. Crenshaw had not been present at Parkland Hospital that day, that there had not been a call, heavens no, there was no call from somebody who said he was LBJ. Charles Crenshaw was ridiculed, held out for obloquy in the eyes and minds of 350, 400,000 physicians in America. That man was defamed. It's a matter of record that he was there at Parkland Hospital. And it's a matter of sworn testimony by at least 2 people that a call came in from somebody who said he was LBJ. But Dr. Crenshaw was not interviewed for JAMA, although Mr. Brio was in Dallas. I guess Fort Worth was too far away. Dr. Lundberg stated the point of entrance on the back of the head, it makes no difference. Did I hear that? On the Larry King show last year, he also said to me when it came up that the single bullet theory was something he had not addressed. Already in the May 27th edition, he had laid it out. He had a big press conference in advance of the journal reaching people, something that I don't know if has ever been done before, but he hadn't even addressed the single bullet theory. Now he tells us that it makes no difference. I leave it to you. Here, yellow is parietal, blue is occipital, Does it make a difference? Are you standing up there? Are you shooting from there? Are you shooting from a whatever? Does it make a difference? Doesn't make any difference. My God, thank God that Dr. Lundberg is now with JAMA, because I would hate to see him testify in a murder case and have his rear end torn apart by F. Lee Bailey on cross-examination if he ever made a statement like that in a case involving death due to gunshot wound to the head. Makes no difference. One of the reasons it makes no difference is about 6 of the doctors down there at the time testified they saw cerebellum. My friends here, cerebrum, cerebellum, they look different. They look very different. To say that people, including a neurosurgeon, did not know what the hell he was talking about when he said cerebellum, to tell me as a pathologist that I can't tell the difference between the uterus and the liver? This is the way they casually dismiss it. Whatever is needed for a given moment in time, it's like $3.99, wherever its final point of resting needs to be. The night of the autopsy from Kennedy's back, the next day from Kennedy's neck, 5 months later under the cockamamie single bullet theory from Connolly's left thigh. Whatever you need, man, whatever you need. Down, high, low, up. Humes, Boswell, think. What did they tell us? Got a hole at the back of the head, right? EOP, to the right of the midline, slightly above EOP. Right? Clark Panel tells us later, 4 inches higher. Here's down here, and here's up here. Dr. Lundberg says it doesn't make any difference. Dr. Lundberg publishes in JAMA that these guys have now given indisputable proof. They had the EOP wound then. They capitulated and bowed under the heavy pressure, the hammering they received from my forensic pathology panelists in the HSCA deliberations, and they said, well, okay, if you guys say it's up there, it's up there. Now they publish in May 27 and October 7, PRP, Dr. Lundberg, it got back down to the EOP. Which is it, Dr. Lundberg? Ask your colleagues, Humes and Boswell. I don't know. You're right. I wasn't there. Tell me. But you sure as hell are not going to walk away from here with 2 entrance wounds in the back of the head. Before you leave here, tell me which one you opt for. Your buddies, Humes and Boswell, the men you would trust with your life down at the EOP, or the experts up above 4 inches higher? Which is it? It can't be both. Publication of materials. I'll tell you, I counted 40 pages. 40 pages. 3.5 are given to letters to the editor of a con Nature. 5 back on October 7th, and then mine, the March 24th, 31st edition. I should be very, very complimented. Dr. Lundberg put it to rest on October 7th. He said that was the final word. JAMA had addressed it. My 500-word. My stinking little 500-word letter in this latest edition opened the door to 3 new articles by Dr. Hartwell, Dr. Latimer, and Dr. Petty. Tell me, Dr. Lundberg, when were those 3 articles solicited? Before or after? How come you can't give any space to Aguilar and Mantic and people with credentials like that? Wait, Dr. Latimer. Dr. Latimer referred to John Nichols in his visit. To borrow the phrase, and believe it or not, Dr. Lambert, I was going to use it, and all I got to say, I would tribute you, the great line from Lloyd Benson, I knew John Nichols, and I sure as hell knew John Nichols. John Nichols repeated the experiment from Edgewood Army Arsenal, shooting the bullets in the cotton wadding, shooting the bullets through goat carcasses to break one fracture to simulate Cornley's rib fracture, shooting through human cadavers to simulate the radial fracture. John Nichols got the same results that Edgewood Army Arsenal got. Those bullets are all substantially deformed and fragmented. And that experiment will not be repeated. I begged, I implored, I offered to pay myself as a member of the HSCA panel, repeat the experiment. They will not repeat it. The only one who does these experiments somewhere in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, with his family, is Dr. Latimer. He does experiments everywhere. Everywhere he does experiments. It's fantastic. What the hell do they need anybody for? Olivier starter than any of these people. Edgewood Army Arsenal. Dr. Latimer was their man. It is absolutely incredible. Shooting fish in a barrel, he says. I'm waiting to find out then how come he misses the car completely. What a schmuck. I mean, it is right there. The car right in front of him is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Shoot, man, shoot! And miss the car. The next two, I better get in. By God, they'll take away my scores from the U.S. Marines retroactively. Dr. Artwell, Dr. West, they talk about the transverse process being hit and fractured, and his spinal cord is deflected, and if it's deflected, that means that the bullet must be deflected. Where does this come from? Not from the panel. You know, I disagreed with these guys, but they were 8 sharp, experienced forensic pathologists. Dr. Artwell stands here and says that he, I think his exact words, that he is bothered or disturbed or angry. He gets upset every time he sees Dr. Bodden's instruction. I know, Dr. Bodden. You are not Dr. Bodden. When Michael Bodden has forgotten about forensic pathology, you won't know for the rest of your life. You're upset about what he presents. He's my dear friend. I should be upset about what he presents. But we can disagree on the conclusions. At least Michael had the integrity, and the others did, to rip Humes and Boswell apart for this horrible, horrible autopsy. And Dr. Lundberg, who does know, who is a competent pathologist, who knows very well in his mind and his heart, who has written on this, who has editorialized, who has talked about the need and the importance of autopsies, he knows what a crummy job it was. And yet he says, in one of the slides, and I guess I don't have time, he says that these people did a fine autopsy. It was all that was necessary for this autopsy, despite the fact that it was on an extraordinary man, under extraordinary circumstances. I want to tell you something. If they did autopsies like that in any approved medical legal office in the United States of America, their certification would be lifted so fast by the American Board of Pathology, their heads would spin. And you know who would be the first to agree with them? Dr. Lundberg. But this case is different, right? This case is different. Dr. West, I know Richard Thornburg. Worked with him when he was in Pittsburgh. Personal friend, U.S. Attorney. Richard Thornburg has enough problems. Don't give him that reflex. Please, please. Well, I give the honorable to Doug Carlson's guest and heed my time. And there are a lot of slides. There's so much to say. On the thigh wound, Dr. Latimer, this is priceless. Dr. Latimer talks about, I don't like to talk about how they were skeptics. All were skeptics going in. I know that's true with Dr. Artwell because I've seen some of the things that have been given to me what he had said in Prodigy, and he has a right to change his mind. So I know it's true that he started off feeling differently. He was one of us. But here's from Dr. Latimer. He says that he didn't know how he felt going in, right? March 13th, 1970, Medical World News. He didn't get into the archives yet. March 13th, 1970, Medical World News. Ready for this quote? Quote from Latimer. Oswald showed what the educated, modern-day, traitorous guerrilla can do among his own people, working with religious-type conviction, willing to lay down his own life, but proposing to kill as many anti-communists as possible. Oswald was devious, skilled at his business, and amazingly cool. That's certainly those are the words of a skeptic, right? Of a man who has not yet arrived at any opinion. And then we've got these bullets that are tumbling, and they're tumbling, and they're tumbling. We got a hole in the neck that they measured. One doctor there said 5 millimeters, another one said 7 to 8 millimeters. They got it tumbling through the neck. And yet they talk about, in the next breath, the keyhole configuration of a tumbling bullet. What kind of a keyhole was that? Whose house? The dollhouse. Where? What are you talking about? Then they talk about it keeps tumbling and tumbling. And they talks about Dr. Petty being a top forensic pathologist. Dr. Petty still talks about a bullet going around the rib. It's doing circles like a merry-go-round. Doesn't go through Connolly's chest. Forget that the lung was punctured. Forget the 10 centimeters of the rib were blown out. He's got the bullet going around. And then somehow says, hey, I've had enough inside the chest. Let me out already. So somehow it just blows out and it comes out the chest. That's Dr. Petty's. And then on it tumbles. And here we have from Dr. George Shires, professor of surgery, Chairman Department of Surgery at Southwestern Medical School, who took care of Connolly's thigh wound. There was a 1 centimeter punctate missile wound over the juncture of the middle and lower third, medial aspect of the left thigh. X-rays of the thigh and leg revealed a bullet fragment which was embedded in the body of the femur and the distal third. Now that's from the surgeon. Is casually dismissed today. I think it was Dr. West. You know, the fragment is not down there. The fragment is there, whether it's embedded, as they said, or right in juxtaposition to it. And this business, he says, well, it only went in 1.5 inches it fell out. You know, I am not. You've never heard me talk disdainfully. I can't, because too many of my close friends and critics are non-MDs, and they've done an absolutely incredible job. So you don't have to be an MD, you don't have to be a forensic pathologist to talk about this, but know something if you're going to get into these things. A bullet that goes in 1.5 inches, that has an overlying hole of an aperture of 4, 5, 6 millimeters, 1 centimeter. What is this business about bullets plopping out? I've never seen it in 12,000 autopsies, in 25,000 other autopsies that I reviewed. Where the hell does this come from? That a bullet goes down, and then all of a sudden, it gets pushed out again. This is a continuation of the Humes-Boswell fake nonsense from the night of the autopsy, that external cardiac massage to the left side of the president's chest forced the bullet that had gone into his back out through the same hole when they learned about the bullet having been found on the stretcher and reported at Parkland Hospital by Tomlinson to the FBI. And the next day, when they learned about the bullet hole in the neck, that hole then represented the bullet wounded exit. The bullet moving 2,000 feet per second, coming out, hitting his starch collar, and stopping dead in his tracks. And now it was from the front of his clothing. And then 5 months later, it was from Connolly's left thigh. And as Dr. West tells us, within 1.5 inches. I know we've got the 1.5 inch measurement. I've never seen that. But I'll take 1.5 inches, Dr. West. Good enough. Tell me how it comes back out through a 1 centimeter hole. I have never seen it. And the shearing effect, oh, what an amazing coincidence. 6.5 millimeters in diameter, circular piece of metal, which Humes and Boswell, these men of known repute and integrity and competence and Eversole, never saw. Right there at the cowlick. At the cowlick, they never saw it. And it magically appears some years later. Isn't that priceless? My friends, we've lost 2 bright, intelligent people to the other side, Dr. Artwell and Dr. McCosey, but we've gained thousands. You continue to talk, you continue to present the facts, and we will be marching by the tens of thousands, and we shall learn the truth in the years ahead in our lifetimes, I guarantee it.
I think I know how Bill and Gail Newman felt when they wanted to instinctively duck from what was going around them, because I don't want to be up here right now.